Well, good evening and welcome to the Maternity and Midwifery Hour. And today we're going to have it slightly different as we often do after a festival, because today we had our very first hybrid event at Cardiff and online, which was absolutely fabulous and really exciting. We had a great programme. And so this evening we're going to have kind of edited highlights. Now I have to say we just had to almost put names in a hat to get the highlights because the whole day was a highlight. We have Elliot Ray talking about dads, childbirth and trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. He's the founder and editor of chief of Music, Football and Fatherhood, which is a support group for fathers and to really engage them brilliantly. And then finishing off, we have the wonderful Abby Holmes, who did a closing keynote exploring midwives as role models for health. And I think that will leave you with a very lively feel. And I think you'll be operating your pelvic floors beautifully at the end of it. So enjoy, and we'll see you next week.
Wow, what an amazing day it's been, and what an honour it is to be here to give your final closing speech. So well done for everyone that's made it through. Such a brilliant but an unusual way to do a conference, this kind of hybrid model that we're seeing for the first time. So it's been really exciting to be part of. I haven't quite figured out how to turn the blur the screen off. So there's a gym behind me. If you're kind of wondering where I am, I look like I'm in like an aircraft hangar. I will do my best to get that turned off in a second. But I'm Abby Holmes, and I am a consultant midwife, as Sue has just said, and I'm also a women's health personal trainer. And my brief was given when Sue and I had a discussion. Sue said to me, make it thought-provoking. So I thought, that's easy. I can always do that. I can do that with most conversations that I have, to be honest. But my goodness, has this been thought-provoking? And I hope I'll take you through my journey and to explain to you exactly how I found it is. So healthcare professionals or midwives, health role models. What an interesting concept to think about. So a healthy role model. So thought, of course we are. Look at us. Of course we are. We work in health, right? Of course we are. So looking what the Nursing Times published in 2017, healthcare professionals should be healthy so that they can be a credible, that's an important word there, communicators of the public health message. I thought, okay, yeah, I take that. I do agree with that. So then I set about, well, I think probably I need to think about defining what healthy means, because actually, and that was quite easy as well, because very nicely, the Department of Health of, not the Department of Health, sorry, the World Health Organization have also defined this for me and said it defines as complete physical, mental, social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. I thought, actually, yep, this is going well. I agree with all of this so far. And then I need to think about, so what's healthy? How on earth do you define what's healthy? So hypothetically, I want everyone to stand up for me. It's the end of the day. You could do it as if you want to. You can stand yourselves up if you've been sat at an office chair, coffee room, in all of you guys down there in the stadium. If you want to stand yourselves up, please stand up with me, because as you can probably tell, and I'm a bit bouncy, so I'm jumping around myself. So everyone stood up. Right, great. Please sit yourself down if your BMI is outside of 18 to 25, because we know once you move outside of those categories, we're no longer considered healthy. If you smoke, please sit yourselves down. If you drink more than 14 units of alcohol a week, also please sit yourself down, bearing in mind a bottle of wine is 10 units, just to put that one out there. If you're not doing your 150 minutes of exercise a week, please sit yourself down. And there we have the Department of Health, very useful infographics, and they did for all different types of pregnancy, children, people with disabilities, but they said we should be doing 150 minutes of our exercise a week. If you're not eating your 5 portions of fruit and veg a day, as the Eat Well plate suggests, please sit yourself down. If you're female and you exceed or you don't have 2,000 calories, if you're male, under or over 2,500 calories, please sit yourselves down. And finally, if you are not having your 2 litres or more of fluid, not alcohol, a day, please sit yourselves down. Is anyone still standing? Because I'll tell you what, I sat down a long time ago. So there we go. We're back to this. How do we define health? Well, and equally, health isn't always visible. I've talked about some very physical characteristics there. And if we think back about that definition, we've got our mental health and our social health well-being. And if we can say that none of us as healthcare professionals have ever had a moment of mental health unwellness or social isolation, felt lonely, and actually because we've experienced these things, we no longer become credible because we're not healthy. So can you see where my thought process is beginning to go with this? And actually, I'm reaching into something that really is quite complex. So when I thought about this, thinking, actually, do women and their families need us to be healthy? And in part, I've decided, no, I really don't think that they do. What they want is evidence-based knowledge to support them and their families to become as healthy as they possibly can. So I'll come back to that in part. So let's hold on to that thought just for a moment. So we're trying to make our society as healthy as possible. We are in the midst of a global pandemic. And what did we do when we started to relax things, to make things, to get us back on that track to being healthy? Well, you guessed it, we opened McDonald's and we kept the gyms closed. Can you believe that? And when that first happened, I have to say, I was absolutely outraged that we could go and get our McDonald's, but we weren't allowed back into our gyms to do physical activity. Mind-blowing to me. But actually, again, when I start to think about it, let's park the nutritional contract of a McDonald's and the calories that might be associated with, I think this might be a Big Mac on my screen, the social and mental well-being again of it. I am unashamedly that I let my children go to McDonald's, and I'm the best mum on the block when I take their friends to McDonald's for their Friday evening Happy Meal. And I thought, actually, we met our family and friends there. You went to a park with your meal and you sat and you conversed, and it made them feel well. It made them feel happy. So actually, I take back my fundamental outrage that McDonald's was open before gyms. I think it should have been done in partnership. I don't think one replaces the other, but I just, again, show you how I go through this thought process. So remember when I said, in part, I don't think that healthcare professionals need to be healthy, but then I think we have a very big problem because our society bases itself on aesthetics. And the best way I can describe this to you is if you were a newly diagnosed diabetic and you had a phone call and the clinician on the end of their phone imparted their many years of wisdom, knowledge, and clinical expertise. Now, you may not lap up every single second of what they're telling you, but you probably take on board the majority of what they tell you. You frantically take notes and you think, right, I've been told this is what I need to do to make myself healthy and well. Let's change that round. Let's go back to a face-to-face consultation, and the same practitioner has a BMI of 45 and is going to give you that same information. You have most likely, or that person has judged that clinician before we've even started that consultation. But what are we looking for? We're striving for perfection. And what is perfection? Well, I thought this was quite nice. And perfection is the illusion based on something we create in our own perception. And so I've got thinking, well, what's my perfection? Have I created anything? What am I doing out there? As I've told you quite a few times now, I'm in a gym. When I'm not being a midwife and spending all of my time with women and their families, I'm bopping around in the gym with the pregnant ladies or the postmenopausal or menopausal women experiencing prolapse symptoms, trying to help them be the healthiest that they can be. I'm selling a product, I'm selling myself. And how do I do that? Now, one of the things that I came across while I was thinking about do we need to be healthy role models, was this: appearance anxiety. I don't think this is something new. I think it's something that we've probably kept very insular and contained within ourselves because we haven't needed to have an opportunity to really share about it. We haven't had to worry about it, but we're out there now. We're on social media. There are influencers everywhere. This is me. This is me last night in the gym. As you hopefully, we look quite similar. That's me there. Is that me? What have I done there? This is me. This is me without the blurred background filter on. This is me with the sweat on my head that you can possibly see that I've removed from that other photograph. This is me with my mascara under my eyes because I've been sweating and hot. So that some of that's come off. And I've wiped away basically any imperfection that was on my skin and any sort of note that might give it away that I'm over the age of 40. So what have I done? Am I still a role model? Am I influencing someone to try to be something they're not? Because this is a phone app that's done this for me. Now, the changes might not be that massive that I've created. I haven't slimmed my waist off or might have chiseled my cheeks there a little bit. I'm not sure, but actually it just shows even I, as someone that feels as a role model that works in the health and fitness industry, this is what we're doing. And if we're doing appearance anxiety as influencers, are we also creating birth anxiety? And by birth anxiety, we have heard some extremely difficult stories today. They have been very difficult to listen to indeed. And I'm not talking about birth trauma. I'm not talking about fear of birth or tocophobia. I'm thinking about the ladies that have such expectations of a perfect birth. We are a world of influencers. We have birth workers influencing. We have healthcare professionals influencing. We have social media, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, you name it, it's out there to influence women to be looking for this idea of perfection that actually I'm not really sure that it exists. There's lots of public health messages. So we go right back to the beginning, to that very first slide, one of the very first slides that I showed you, and saying about how we have to be credible to be able to give our health communicate health messages. Well, there are some of those things that are really easy to do. Please don't stand outside a maternity unit in your uniform having a cigarette, or please don't walk to the health board parameters in your uniform because you're off property, but you're still in your uniform having a cigarette, because that does portray a message. Think about the health choices while you are acting as a professional that you make. But when we look at everything, we know there's an abundance of health inequalities out there. Embrace tells us so. This pandemic, unfortunately, has shown us that there are health inequalities out there. They have our women that are substance misusers or users. I don't like the word misuse, because if you're using a substance, you're using it, whether that be heroin, cocaine, cocodamol, tramadol, all of those ones. We've got obesity. Now, obesity, I do not discredit obesity. I do believe that we have some unrefuted impact of obesity. We know it increases the risk of birth defects. It makes scanning so much harder in pregnancy. It increases the risk of either a growth-restricted or a macrosomic baby, diabetes, preterm labour, and ultimately a stillborn baby is a slightly higher chance with our obese population. It's unrefutable. We cannot deny it. Mental health, well-being, again, these are all things that as we should be influencing as healthcare practitioners. Do we need to be perfect in all of these areas? Well, I'd say not. And I think actually, if you think that you are, I think we might need to have a little bit of a word there, because actually I know, for instance, I haven't ever been a smoker, haven't ever misused substances, but I'm not sure my mental health has always been on point. I'm certainly overweight after I have my babies. So there are things that we've all done. And I would hate to think I'm not a credible practitioner just because I may have experienced those kind of things. Social isolation. I moved to Wales, knew my husband, and that's the only person I knew. So I'd say I was pretty isolated then, but my social health maybe wasn't that well when I first came here, but that didn't make me any worse for a midwife. It certainly didn't. All of these things that I'm describing to you here fit into women's health. Women and pregnant people are at the heart of everything that we do. It's the focus of this entire conference that we've been here today to talk about. And we want to make sure that we keep our women as healthy as possible. We have an absolute duty to make sure that we are imparting evidence-based knowledge for these women. It would be really lovely to say that we're all going to live by it, but that's just not reality. And that certainly isn't life. It's not my reality, because what I didn't say is when I buy the kids' Happy Meal, I generally tuck into a quarter pounder myself. You know, and that bottle of wine, I've definitely had that bottle of wine myself as well. But by placing labels and by trying to import all of this information onto women, we feel that we're embracing them, that we're bringing them in, that we are trying to influence health, we are trying to improve health outcomes, but actually, is all we're doing pushing our women away from us. So we feel we're being role models, but are we pushing them away? Do we place labels on women before we've even met them? Quite often, you'll have a referral to your clinic. Mine might be a birth choices clinic, because the lady is hoping to make a choice, and absolutely she's going to make a choice. It's her birth and it's her body and it's her baby. it's a little bit of a catchphrase, but it means exactly what it says. But I've already been told whether they're high or low risk. And by that, we have already placed restrictions on the services that they can come into, the service or the places that they can access. So if we go back to looking at obesity and BMI, I know that if the BMI is over 40, we're going to go, home birth centre, not sure about that one. Birth outside of guidance, that's what's going to be written on your notes. And actually, we're pushing these women away rather than saying, I want to facilitate choice for you. I want to facilitate all of the options to help you to become as healthy as you absolutely possibly can. And I want to support you. And sometimes you're going to be down there and you're going to be eating that cheeseburger. And the other times you're going to be stood on the treadmill or out with your friends having that five-mile walk. And it's all about how are we going to support the women to do those kind of things. Like I said to you, I'm in a gym, and I walked in here probably 2008 after my, no, that's the wrong year, I do beg your pardon, 2013 after my second daughter was born. That walk through that door was probably one of the hardest walks I've ever done. And we need to remember that about our women. We need to remember that walking into that antenatal clinic for the first time, when she's coming to your specialist clinic to be told that she's overweight, when she's coming to be told that she can't come to the birth centre to have her baby, when she's going to that antenatal education class for the first time, maybe with or without a partner, walking through those doors for the first time is really, really challenging. And that's our key moment to make it as positive as we possibly can. Because what are we trying to achieve for the women? We're trying to give them a healthy and happy pregnancy. You can't separate those two out, because if they're not healthy, they're certainly probably not happy. And if they're not happy, they're not healthy. So it's really important that we keep those entwined together. It's kind of like safety and birth experience. I don't think they're separate from each other. I think that you can have an alive woman and an alive baby, but safe and positivity all goes together. So I've just told you what we're trying to achieve. So how do we do this? Well, I think we need to rethink what we're doing, because we bring them to antenatal clinics and we tell them they're fat. We tell them their BMI is elevated. We have terrible bedside manners. We say chubby, or we have even a label of plus size. And if you see what meets the criteria for plus size, well, my goodness, I think that was me just when I was pregnant or just after I'd had my babies. And I think we need to get a bit smarter. I absolutely think that we need to rethink this. We need to completely think outside the box of what we're doing, because otherwise these problems wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be having these women with these health complications associated with smoking, poor diet, social inequalities, obesity, if it was just as easy as sitting them down and saying, should you lose some weight, please, before you think about having a baby? It's just, let's get smarter. Let's rethink what we're doing. How do I do it? So, as you know, if you've seen me speak before, I spend a lot of my time with women that have pelvic floor dysfunction. And this was born out of my own very personal experience after having my own babies, and deciding that wandering around in a tenor lady was not the norm. It was not what was to be acceptable for the rest of our lives. Even if we've never had children, as soon as we hit the menopausal or even perimenopausal stage, that actually this becomes the accepted, that actually bladders, and sometimes we have anal leakage as well, which is totally unacceptable. So I decided I felt I needed to do something about this. And like I just said, I need to get smarter. So I thought, well, if I just sit in a room and tell women to exercise, they'll nod at me and say, yes, thank you very much, I will. Then they'll walk out and they get back in the car and they drive home, and then they go and sit on the sofa. And then probably nothing more will be thought of the conversation we've had. Let's do this differently. Let's bring them to outdoor spaces, which is really great, obviously, with a pandemic. Or bring them into classes, bring them into gyms like I'm in. I've got this beautiful studio behind me that I use once a week. I have pregnant ladies, we have all our music on, we have us dancing, we have babies, we have breastfeeding, we have everything going on. So, there are different ways to do things, but it's about engaging and becoming active. So just to think about, I'm just going to focus a little bit on pelvic dysfunction, if I can, for the remainder kind of the time that we've got left to talk. And just to say, last year in a pandemic, 500,000 women gave birth to babies in 1 year, just in the UK alone. And 140,000 of them suffered with pelvic dysfunction. That might have been short term, but for a lot of them, that will be long term. This will be life debilitating. This will be not leaving the home unless you know you're going somewhere where there's a toilet nearby. That's 1 year. We're almost at the end of this year. So there's another lot to add onto this and all those years behind. These numbers are enormous that we're dealing with. This is, and I am one person tipping the iceberg. These are so enormous. We have charities set up for them. If you've ever been and listened to the Amazing Charity, they are like the stories that we have just heard from the ladies that have been speaking and the gentleman that has been speaking. And it's just not acceptable. I've been trained with organisations set up purely to look after women that have got pelvic floor dysfunction. I wish organisations like that didn't exist. I'm grateful to them for my training. I love the moments that I spend with the women that I work with, but I wish I never had to work with these women and get them to the places that they need to go to. So let's think about the science. I don't really know why I put the science, but it's a slide I think I've used before. Some of you may have seen it before, but it's about what am I trying to get ladies to understand, or gentlemen to understand, anyone to understand really, is that we're very good at looking at things in isolation. We spend a lot of time thinking it's my core. And if I say your core, I mean, most of you instantly put your hands to your tummy and think, oh, it's my stomach muscles. There you are. Well, where are they? Have I got any? Well, absolutely. Good news is you have got some. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to be upright. They're fundamental. They might be buried a bit deep in some of us, particularly, they are me after having 2 children, but they are there, I promise. But at the centre of our core, so we've got a diaphragm at the top here, which is essential to our breathing. And then you've got your abdominal wall muscles that I've just been talking about. And then you've got your pelvic floor, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about, but in a minute. And then you've got your lumbar and thoracic muscles, which is at the back just here. And they're all essential to each other. But if they're not talking to each other or they're misfiring, you got no hope of having some control over there. So what do? I invite women to reconnect with their bodies, to explore their bodies, to understand what's going on in their bodies and understand the impact that that's having on their physical health and their emotional well-being. Because if you can imagine, if you can't plan your activities, you've got to be able to plan it around going to the bathroom, you're going to be really limiting what you can do. If you're not going to go take your child to a soft play for the fear that your child asks you to go on there, and you cannot possibly manage that, these are life that's just not right. It's not the way that we should be living. We will have all had ladies come to our antenatal clinic. If you've done a booking this week or have seen a postnatal woman, you will have said to her, "You doing your pelvic floor?" Mm-hmm. Yeah, great, brilliant, great. Nice little tick in the box there. Told her about pelvic floor. Asked her the question, "Are you doing your pelvic floor exercises?" She's walked out of the room going, "Pelvic floor? Where's my pelvic floor? I don't know." But I said yes, because it sounded better if I said yes than no. All I know, it might be appliance in the house. Because we don't teach children at school about the anatomy and physiology of the pelvis. We certainly don't do it in PE, but how to control the pelvic floor, which is something that really, we'll get onto the school nurses for that one. So we'll move into that realm, and that's another talk, I think. Okay, so I'm going to run back. So I'm going to be shouting at you now because I'm going to step back. So this is my pelvis, my lovely pelvis that comes around with me. Well, those coccyx has fallen off. He's got within this room somewhere, so I must make sure I find that before we leave. Okay, so just to think about a few things. This is your pelvic structure. So this is the thing that we've all got in common. I don't know who's watching me. Male, female, young, old. What this unites us. This wonderful structure here is our pelvis. We may all have something slightly different in here, but we've all got a pelvis. So what have I got in mind today? I have a bladder. I wouldn't normally just throw these on the floor. A bowel. And for today, I actually have a uterus as well. And if you don't have the same anatomy and minus the uterus, you still want your pelvis to do exactly the same thing. You want to make sure it holds everything in there, nothing falls out, and certainly nothing leaks. So I think we can be united in agreeing that whatever our gender, whatever our orientation, we all have one of this wonderful structure that is your pelvis. So to do a little bit of myth busting about your pelvis, it is for everyone, not just females, that you can have anal and urinary incontinence from a weak pelvic floor. This isn't an A&P. lecture, I'm not going to go through the structure of your pelvis or the beautiful muscles that make up this, because we all knew that from being undergraduates. We all remember that. We can all name all the muscles that sit within that pelvic floor. We'll just call it the pelvic floor for now. So there we are. So that's everything that we've got there. So anal and urinary incontinence can affect everyone. It doesn't just need to be a female. Weak pelvic floor muscles can cause a leakage in either male or female. It can impact on your sexual health for male and female, and it can be life impacting and life changing for both male and female. So when we do our pelvic floor exercises, we need to not just think that this is a female dominated thing that no one else needs to do it. So when you next do your next booking or your next postnatal visit, I urge you to ask both. If there's a male and a female couple, if they are both doing their pelvic floor exercises. So I hope you can still hear me. I'm just bobbing down to pick up the weight. If I asked you to do a little poll of who knows how to do pelvic floor exercises, I think most would probably tell me they did, because they don't want to tell me that they don't know how to do them. That they could tell me where the pelvic floor is. Like I said, I won't get you to label all the muscles, but actually that you could give me some understanding of the functioning of the pelvic floor, and in its rudimentary, it's to hold everything in and stop you, give you that control of your bladder and the control of your bowel. We have something called the Squeezy app, which we've probably all heard of. There's a free and a paid version of it. The free will suffice. It is the starting ground. So I'd say it's this kind of level for what to do. And we all say to ladies, just do pelvic floor exercises when you are boiling the kettle, when you're waiting for the toast to pop up, when you're at the traffic lights, waiting for them to turn green. They are the opportunities to do your pelvic floor exercises. That's great. I'm never going to knock that at all. But I'd also like to know how many ladies' pelvic floors failed them when they're stood waiting for the kettle to boil, because it's probably not very many of them, unless they try to judge it and think, actually, I'll put the kettle on before I go through to the bathroom. And then they may have some issues. But for the general, if they are static, the pelvic floor is generally in pretty good shape. It's when we start to move, that's when we become our issue. And I'm going to take you through some few movements. So for the very last few movements of your day, I can't see you all, so except Sue. So I will know if Sue, if you're doing this or not. I would like to invite you all to stand up, and I'm going to shoot back, and I'm just going to take you through a few little bits and pieces that we are, that I would like you to share with all the ladies. This isn't a secret. This isn't my product. I like to shout about this stuff, as you know. Okay. So everyone, stand up. So this is my pelvis. We have your symphysis pubis at the front. You've got your coccyx at the back. It's a static structure. It's not going to move, but we know how to use visualization. We're midwives. We talk about ladies about it all the time when they're having their babies. So let's do some visualization. What I want you to imagine is your symphysis pubis at the front, your coccyx at the back. You're going to be drawing them together. At the same time as doing that, you're going to lift your pelvic floor up into your abdomen. So that's squeezing the muscles around your urethra and squeezing the muscles around your back passage. And you're going to do that all as you exhale. So sounds easy, doesn't it? There's a few techniques there. We're going to pull everything together. We're going to draw up and we're going to exhale. So let's all do that together. Now, fingers crossed, you felt some sort of connection there with your pelvic floor. If you didn't, we could work on that and Google how to do your holistic core restore pelvic floor exercises. However, if you thought, that's brilliant, I've got my pelvic floor nailed, because I'm sure of the predominantly female audience, many of you I'm striking a chord with, many of you are thinking my pelvic floor is not where it should be. Okay, so I did that static, so let's do that again. We've got your symphysis pubis at the front, we've got your coccyx at the back. We're going to inhale, we're going to blow out, and as you blow out, we're going to squeeze those two bones together, pull the pelvic floor up, and exhale. And you should feel that contraction in the pelvic area, and you'll feel your abdominal muscles contract as well. Brilliant. Okay, now what I want to do is, whenever you are in your space, do exactly the same thing and walk forward at the same time. So, walking, inhale, I can't do this and talk at the same time, so you have to pretend what I'm doing. So, inhale, exhale, squeeze the pelvis together, and draw the pelvic floor muscles up. Could you even connect with that part of your body? Because for most women, they'd be like, where on earth is my pelvic floor gone? It has left the building because you've just asked me to move and do the same thing. And does that show you how instantly you can say, well, that makes it click? That's why I can't bounce on a trampoline and control my pelvic floor at the same time, because I can't go up in the air. I can't squeeze all that together. I need my body to do that instinctively for me. So it's really easy. Don't be alarmed if you thought, oh, crikey, I don't know what she's talking about. I can't do that. I can't connect that in my body. So what I want to do, we're going to do the thing again. I'm going to go that way this time. So we've got centrifuges at the front, we've got coccyx at the back. Inhale, I'm going to walk forward, I'm going to exhale and squeeze it all together. And just keep doing that. And that's what you need to do for a pelvic floor exercise. And then if you think, actually, I've nailed this, I can feel that connection. Well, let's add a little bit of weight to it, shall we? This is a 5-kilo dumbbell. All I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this and I'm going to lower it down as I exhale. So, I'll do one hand. Centrifuges, coccyx, inhale, exhale, as you exhale, let the weight go down. And there we are. So that shows you. Okay, so those last few minutes, like I say, let's get active. Come on, all of you up on your feet, at your desk, in your coffee rooms, in the stadium, everyone up. Grab your water bottle, your bag, whatever it is. Let's centrifuges, coccyx together, inhale, blow out, squeeze it all together and take that weight down. And that is a simple enhancement onto using your pelvic floor. The next one we can do, we can pop our weights to the side. We could do this in our coffee room. We could do this in the night, you know, when you've got that quiet. I'm not sure what the quiet shift exists anymore, but when you do have that quiet 4 o'clock in the morning shift time, you can. Centrifuges, coccyx, draw it all together, deep breath in, blow it out, take it down, move to a swan. Find that connection. That's the important bit. That's the concentration that you need to see on your face. That's the connection that you need to feel, because that's when you know that your pelvic floor will not fail you. Now, this is my gym. This is K2, I would say, the finest gym in Bridgend. I am renowned for wandering around here talking about pelvic floors, dysfunction, all of those kind of things. You know, as midwives, we talk about all sorts, don't we? But it's just really, really important to me. And I hope that you can tell from the passion in my voice. And I'm a bit out of breath from what I've just been doing. I don't normally shout and do things at the same time. But role models for health. I'd like to think I'm going to change my mind. Yes, we are, because we're passionate about what we do. We love the women that we care for. We make sure we give them the best possible evidence we possibly can. We strive to find it. During this pandemic, we've had NICE guidance still published. We've had RCOG guidance. We have been on it every time some sort of guidance has had to change. And we have moved all of our physical contact appointments over into virtual. So we never lost contact with any woman. So at the end of it, are we role models for health? Yes, we are. And we should celebrate that, because we deserve to be celebrated. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming to my session, first and foremost. It's a privilege to be able to speak to you. And when I say it's a privilege, I really do mean that. You know, I've had a fantastic experience with some midwives, and speaking to them, and through my own experience of becoming a dad. You know, the work you do is fantastic, really, really fantastic. So thank you so much. So I'm going to talk to you about dads and childbirth trauma and PTSD. I think it's something that it's an area that's emerging. You know, dads now are more involved in their children's lives than they have been ever, and they are now taking on a lot more of the, I guess, emotional and mental baggage that comes with parenting. And I always have to give a disclaimer: parenting is amazing. Being a dad is the best thing in the world, but it does come with its challenges, especially when you're active and involved and getting your hands dirty, literally. So childbirth trauma and PTSD. And when I, you know, tell people about childbirth trauma and that myself, I personally suffered from PTSD, the expression on people's faces is sometimes blank. It's sometimes shock, and it's sometimes, oh, me too. And that "oh, me too" is fantastic. And actually, the more I've been open about my own experiences, the more that I've had that response and that reaction. And I think it just goes to show that this is something that is actually quite common, and there are so many dads out there that are witnessing and suffering from PTSD after their partner has gone through a traumatic birth. So first of all, we haven't got long, so I'll just quickly introduce myself and say a bit more about who I am. So my name is Elliot, and I have a history working in diversity inclusion. I've been the head of race equality in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. I was lastly the head of diversity inclusion delivery at the Treasury. But that's not the reason I'm here. The reason I'm here is because of the work I've done with dads, with fathers, and setting up my organization 6 years ago now, Music Football Fatherhood. And we work with dads, and we're all about open conversations about fatherhood. So we do that through our blog. We've got hundreds of articles on there written by different dads. We have a podcast called Daddy Debates. We do monthly online meetups called The Lodge, and also have a book out called Dad, which is 20 stories from different fathers. I'm also heavily involved in Dads at Work and do a lot of research around creating equality in the workplace, gender equality, and how we support working dads. And I do a lot of talks called Engaging Dads, where I go around to companies and talk about masculinity and mental health and new dads at work. I'm also a writer, having written for The Independent and The Telegraph and many other mainstream publications. But outside of all of that, the best job I have and the most challenging job I have and the most rewarding job I have is of a father. I am a dad to one little girl at the moment. She is 6 in 4 weeks. And we are literally counting down the days. Every day she wakes up and she says, "Dad, how many days until my birthday party?" So we're counting that down slowly. She's very, very excited. But I love being a dad. But for us, me and my wife, the start was quite difficult. The pregnancy was relatively okay, but quite late on to the pregnancy, we received a letter through the post. And that letter said that my wife had something called Group B strep, GBS, which we had never heard of before. And we had to do a lot of research on. So we were quite worried because, when you Google things, oftentimes you get the worst. And we kind of came to the realization that this is can be quite a serious infection. We were also told that the likelihood that the infection was passed on to the baby was quite low. So we were given intravenous antibiotics during childbirth, and we were relatively okay with that. But when we went into labor, it was quite difficult. It was a very long labor. There was lots of scares around heart rate and around blood pressure, and lots of times there were doctors running into the room. It felt like I was in an episode of Casualty at one point where it's just us in the room, and then the midwife presses a big red button and everyone comes running in. And it lasted for just over 24 hours, and my daughter was brought out via ventouse. And when she was brought out, she was grey. She wasn't breathing properly. At the same time, my wife had lost a lot of blood as well. So it was a really, really scary moment where there were doctors surrounding my wife and trying to stop the blood flow. But at the same time, they're resuscitating and drawing fluid out of my daughter's throat on the other side of the room. And I really remember just feeling like that moment so helpless, quite numb and in disbelief. I think with a lot of new parents, we don't prepare them for what can happen. So you go into it with this fairy tale, and then when something goes wrong, you're completely unprepared and you literally don't know what to do. And in that moment, it was literally that. It was, such a difficult moment where you're really looking at people that you've met 8 hours ago to save your family's life. And that is the reality. Both the people I love the most were in pretty a bad way, and it was pretty serious. And so after a few minutes, they put my daughter in an incubator and they said, "Where do you want to go? Do you want to stay here with your wife, or do you want to go to intensive care?" So I went to intensive care, and I remember walking through the hospital, and this hallway. I just remember the white walls and being in a daze, not quite sure what to think, what to feel. I tried to call my mum, but there was no reception in the hospital, and just feeling like I was watching everything and having a kind of out of body experience, really. And we got into the intensive care ward, and the nurse there looked at me in the eye and she said, you've got to snap out of this. Basically, you have to be present for your family. At the time, I really remember thinking, she's right. I need to come into the room. And that was the moment I kind of came into the room, and I came back, and I was present again. And from that moment, I was, in intensive care for 2 weeks we spent there. And I met some amazing parents, mums and dads, that were just caring for their babies every day in intensive care. In the morning, we had this room where you can go in, and all the parents would gather in this room. And they gather in this room so they can get a private consultation one by one. The doctors take you out. In that room, literally, I was amazed by the strength. And it was kind of like a world all by itself of these people who were having a shared experience. But amazing people we met there. Literally, they still blow my mind when I think about the conversations we had in that room to support each other. So luckily, the hospital gave us a room, so I could live in the hospital for 2 weeks, and we stayed there. And my daughter was having antibiotics, my wife was getting treated, and it was going okay. But we were getting good news and bad news. Some days the antibiotics were working, some days they weren't, and it was up and down. But I think we kind of, for the most part, held it together. And at the end of the 2 weeks, when we were just had the good news actually that the infection was going down, my daughter out of nowhere developed a massive bump on the back of her head. And that's when the doctors really got worried. They really, really got worried about that. And you can see the tone changed. We had a specialist drive in from another hospital we'd never met before. In our room, the midwives and the nurses were making our bed for us. They were bringing us dinner. We could tell that they were worried for us. That the vibe had changed. And they said we have, that they're worried. It could be, blood clot, anything. So we were booked in for an emergency MRI scan the next day. And that night was, by far the hardest of my life. After being strong for 2 weeks and trying to hold it together, we literally just let everything out. We cried, we prayed. I'll never forget Nagme, one of the midwives, joined us in the room. I'm sure her colleagues must have been wondering where she was because she was with us for what felt like about 3 hours. And we were just there, just letting it all out. And I didn't know where the tears were coming from. Literally, I was crying so much, just praying. And the next morning we went for the MRI scan. And a couple of hours later, we went back to our room and we waited. And I'll never forget the nurse running through, bursting through the door, giving us a massive hug. Because we were family. We knew these people so well. We were around them all day, every day for 2 weeks. She burst into the room, gave us a massive hug. And she was like, it's okay, it's just a bone structure. You can go home the next day. And I think that's where, I guess, in some ways, the story ended, but the story started as well. So we went home. This was in 2015. I had 2 weeks paternity leave from my company. I had a little bit of annual leave left over, but majority of the time was spent in the hospital. So it was going home, really going back to work, into a busy full-time job. And that's when the next phase, I guess, of this journey started. For a few months, we were holding it together. My wife was eventually diagnosed with postnatal anxiety. I was trying my best to, I guess, suppress the emotions and what had happened and try to process it, but at the same time, not talk to anyone really about it. And my daughter ended up having an allergic reaction, a very serious allergic reaction. And we were back in the hospital again. We were back in the A&E and, the flashing lights back in the hospital. And for me, that's what kind of really made me kind of hit a brick wall, I guess. And from there, I was back in that hospital and mentally back in that place. And for months, I was having flashbacks. I wasn't sleeping at all. I was having nightmares. I was feeling really anxious, over emotional for no reason. I was watching, dating programs on TV and end up crying at them because I was just feeling overly emotional. And I knew that something wasn't right. And I knew that there was unresolved things that I hadn't dealt with. But as men, what we do sometimes is we try to pretend it's not real and not happening. And so I didn't actually seek any help for another year. And that was kind of by accident, actually, because I'd started my platform by that point and someone wanted to interview me about the birth. And when they were talking to me, they could tell that I couldn't really get through the conversation. So she recommended I talk to a birth specialist that specializes in trauma, And then I started to have conversations with her. So now I'm really, really passionate, and through Music, Football, Fatherhood, we do a lot of work around supporting dads and some work around birth trauma. We recently did a podcast with the Birth Trauma Association, and we've got someone from that company to add some professional expertise, and we've got a couple of dads who had experienced similar things, and we just had a conversation. It was so emotional. There's a lot of tears. Hearing someone that is basically explaining your experience is very cathartic, but very, very emotional as well. And that was an amazing conversation. I definitely recommend you go and check that out if you're interested in this. So now I do a lot of campaigning, and I've written and been quite open about my experience. I think the more we can get dads to talk about these things and just realize that it's the reality. If you go through an event where your family's lives are literally at danger and in serious trouble, that is a very difficult moment to go through. And not everyone's going to come out of that and just be able to get on with a normal life and move on from it. So I wrote this article. Well, I didn't write it, but it was written for me. I was interviewed by a journalist, and this came out in June this year, June or July. And it was one of the most viewed pieces on the BBC News piece that week. It was on the homepage for a couple of weeks. And the amount of emails and DMs on Twitter I've had from dads and mums, but a lot of dads saying, this is my story. I can resonate with this. And they'd never shared their story with anyone else. They're sending me chapter and verse, literally. They're sending me pages and pages describing their experience and how they felt, and saying to me they'd never spoken to anyone, not even their partners, not their friends. They'd never explained to anyone exactly, what they experienced, which for me just said that this is something that we need to be more open about, and we need to make it more acceptable for men and new dads to be open about their PTS experiences, or just their difficulties after going through a very traumatic experience. So I wanted to kind of talk to you about a few things that I've picked up along the way, and I know there's going to be a section from Racial, the Birth Trauma Association, later on. I'm sure she'll give you a bit more context, but just working with the dads, we've done a little bit of work with the NHS as well, some trusts around supporting dads through the process. So a few things that I've picked up and I think would be good just to share with you. So, dads in childbirth trauma, we know 30,000 women a year experience birth trauma, and not always, but often there'll be a dad that's present there as well. So I think it's really important to recognize that dads are, as they're part of this experience. Obviously they're it's not their body, but mentally, emotionally, they are there, and they are feeling all those feelings too. Dads can also feel helpless, scared and fearful for their families' lives. I've spoken to so many dads who that feeling of helplessness, you can't do anything, nothing really. There's no words you can say. You're not a medical professional. There's nothing you can do on that side of things. There's very little comfort you can give. You're literally just an onlooker. And that feeling of helplessness is something I've heard described so many times. I think dads can feel left out of the process. They can feel uninformed, forgotten, and sometimes like a backseat passenger as well. And we hear this often, that the dad is kind of, I guess, cast aside a little bit in the process, and not really considered. So that's something that we hear a lot. And I think maybe we can do a little bit more about that too. So what can be done? That's a big question. Just a couple of things. And it'd be good to, get your questions and your opinions. So please do interact with us and let us know what you think. But what can be done? So I think there's a couple of things. So first and foremost, it's engaging dads through the maternity process and increasing awareness of what to do if something can happen. So this is really difficult because even myself, when I'm talking to expectant dads, I don't want to tell them too much about my experience, and I don't want to say too much about what can happen because it might not happen for them. And ultimately, you don't want to scare people. Otherwise, no one would ever have children. So I don't know if we need to tell them everything, but I do feel like we go into the process so unprepared sometimes in terms of what can go wrong. We don't have a clue a lot of the time that there can be such complications, that complications are so common. So I think we can kind of educate parents and dads a little bit more and say, look, this might happen or that can happen, and just be mindful of that. Don't try not to worry about it, but if it does happen, and keep calm, reassure them that statistically they'll be okay, and just have a little bit of a conversation about what could potentially happen. I think it could help them be in a better mind space and be a bit more prepared. And the second thing that could be done is, immediate attention obviously needs to be on the mother's health. Then that doesn't really need to be said. Of course, that's the emergency. That should be 100% the focus. But in the aftermath, the hours after, consulting the dad, giving him some information, helping the dad feel part of that process, asking him how he is, just involving him in that process is really, really important. We talk to a lot of dads who feel like afterwards, no one even kind of really acknowledges that they may have suffered and been through something as well. So just that acknowledgement, can go a long way. So I'll definitely, think that there's more that we can do there. So let's also talk about PTSD. So PTSD is an anxiety disorder. This is an anxiety disorder, which is caused by witnessing a traumatic event. In this case, usually a traumatic birth. And PTSD can show up as flashbacks, nightmares, and increased levels of anxiety. This makes it difficult for the dad to support their partner and bond with their baby. And dads will often have fears about their partner giving birth again. We hear this a lot, that dads are sometimes very worried about having a second child. And for us, we're only just in that place now where we can kind of think about it again. For a long time, we couldn't even fathom going through that experience again. So what can be done here? I think there's a few things. Again, supporting dads through the maternity process. We know that dads who are engaged through the maternity process, and there's some good examples in Manchester. Dads Matters are an integrated NHS service that caters for dads. That can be really good for involving the dad through the process. So when they do need support in the postnatal period, they have a point of contact. They know that the service is available for them. They're more likely to get in touch with the services available. I think mental health assessment and support for dads who have experienced a traumatic birth is really, really important. Really good to see that some trusts have started screening high-risk dads now for mental health illnesses, and that's really, really good. But it'd be great across the board if we know there's been complications that dad is specifically spoken to. And the last thing I'd recommend everyone do is read the Fathers Reaching Out report by Mark Williams. You may know Mark is a big mental health campaigner for dads. And he last year in 2020 released a report called Fathers Reaching Out, which has loads of information about postnatal depression, suicidal ideation, PTSD, the causes, how they manifest in dads, and some really good recommendations about what can be done too. So I'll leave it there, and we can open it up for questions. But just to say, if you want to get in contact with me, then you can visit our website. We have a book called Dad Out, which is a collection of 20 moving stories from different dads across the UK, different ages, different backgrounds in terms of race. And they speak about widowhood, speak about stillbirth, miscarriage, being in a interracial relationship and raising a mixed race child, growing up without a dad, and trying to figure out how to be a dad. And I share my story about childbirth trauma and PTSD. So please get in contact on social media or LinkedIn. I'm happy to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much.